Shadows behind the shelves. In the quiet pre-dawn hours at the LCBO on Dundurn, the fluorescent lights flickered above rows of bottles, each shelf a silent witness to decades of routine. Among these shadows moved two figures, known on whispered lips as the Lurches. Leonard Calloway, towering, somber, with eyes that held the cold secrets of a man who'd stared death in the face, and Michael Trent, equally imposing, yet exuding a rougher, more unpredictable energy, were both burdened with nicknames that masked far more than just their physical presence. They had long been the subject of fearful fascination in Hamilton, and later, in Burlington, accused of unspeakable crimes that had rocked the city. Yet behind the horror that everyone assumed was the work of these enigmatic figures lay a secret so dark it threatened to unravel everything. Unbeknownst to the city and even to the two Lurches themselves, the carnage that had made headlines, the trail of gruesome murders, was not the result of their malevolent hands. Instead, a solitary figure had pulled the strings from the very heart of the LCBO. Candor and jealousy, wrapped in a veneer of quiet efficiency, had come to define the daily existence of Veronica. A stalker by title, Veronica was anything but ordinary. With raven hair pulled into a severe bun, a cold, calculating smile that rarely wavered, and eyes that sparkled with secret delight at the mere thought of chaos, she was a force unseen by her co-workers. While Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent were forced to toil away, dispensing bottles, moving heavy cases, and enduring the endless monotony of restocking shelves, Veronica relished in the power of inaction. In truth, she did almost no work at all. Instead, she spent her breaks scheming, turning her subtle crush on both Lurches into a perverse art of manipulation. Her secret desire, long simmering in the recesses of her heart, was to make their lives as miserable as possible. And so, one by one, she began a twisted campaign, planting evidence, staging faux crime scenes, and even breaking into storage rooms and after-hours facilities to discover bodies that weren't truly there. Her goal was twofold. First, to frame Leonard Calloway as a cold-blooded murderer, and second, to drive a wedge between the two men, ensuring they would be forever trapped in a world of suspicion and despair. Meanwhile, she would sit at home in her small apartment, the glow of a solitary lamp illuminating her secret as she flicked her bean in moments of perverse satisfaction, dreaming up ever more maddening ways to torment them. The deceptive calm. Before the storm, Veronica's machinations began subtly. It started with minor pranks, a misplaced bottle here, an unexplained smudge of blood on a crate there, small enough to be dismissed as accidents. But as the days turned into weeks, her actions grew bolder. Late one night, while the LCBO lay cloaked in silence, Veronica sneaked into the back storage room. Under the cover of darkness, she arranged several items to mimic a scene of violence. A discarded glove stained with synthetic blood, a hastily scribbled note bearing the initials LC. The careful placement was intended to link the evidence to Leonard Calloway, whose initials perfectly matched the taunting message. Her artistry lay not just in staging the scene, but in the intricate detail that suggested a pattern, a series of murders that occurred in tandem with her shifting schedule. The police, desperate for a breakthrough in a string of unsolved crimes, found themselves intrigued by the precision of the evidence. They began to notice that the gruesome events in Hamilton and Burlington occurred in a seemingly orchestrated fashion, each scene meticulously constructed to implicate someone who had, until then, been considered beyond reproach. At the LCBO, the other female employees, already resentful of the heavy workload that Leonard and Michael bore, soon found themselves unknowingly manipulated by Veronica's charm and deceit. With whispered lies and subtle insinuations, she turned colleagues against the two Lurches, fueling the rumor mill with tales of secretive behavior and inexplicable absences. Meanwhile, the men remained unaware of the true hand guiding the chaos around them, even as they bore the brunt of the slander and suspicion. The illusion of bloodshed. The staged murders quickly escalated in complexity. The first major incident was reported at Jackson Square Mall. A security guard was found, or so it seemed, with a fatal wound that appeared all too real. The media seized on the story, and soon Hamilton Lurch became a name synonymous with terror. But as the investigation unfolded, forensic experts began to whisper among themselves. The blood patterns, the angles of the wounds, and the physical evidence didn't quite add up. There were subtle inconsistencies, hints that the scene had been tampered with. But in the fevered panic of a city desperate for an explanation, these details were swept aside. Veronica watched with morbid satisfaction as the public's fear spiraled out of control. Each new faux murder was a carefully calculated stroke in her grand design. At Limeridge Mall, a woman was found slumped in her car, her lifeless eyes fixed on a dark sky, a scene staged with chilling precision in a vacant parking lot. At Westdale Food Basics, a man appeared to have been fatally wounded near the loading dock. The police, now under mounting pressure, began to see a pattern that pointed unerringly toward Leonard Calloway. In Burlington, the terror continued. The Burlington Reaper moniker was born overnight, as several crimes were attributed to an unseen killer. At the Queen's Head, the Dickens, and the Poacher, anonymous tips led to frantic investigations, each discovery carefully crafted to instill panic. In one particularly dramatic instance, a bartender from the judge and jury vanished after closing, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a trail of evidence that Veronica had painstakingly planted. It was all part of her master plan, a symphony of deceit designed to ensure that suspicion would forever rest on the shoulders of the two Lurches. Yet amid the chaos, the reality was far removed from the horror being reported. None of the victims were real. The bodies, the blood, the scars of violence, they were all elaborate stagecraft designed to fool even the most seasoned detectives. Veronica's ingenuity had crafted an elaborate web of falsehoods that extended from the back rooms of the LCBO to the darkest alleys of Burlington. And in the midst of it all, she relished her power, a power that allowed her to shape the narrative of terror with a few stolen moments in the night. The cracks begin to show. As the investigation deepened, Detective Marisol Rivera, whose relentless pursuit of the truth had already put her on a collision course with the myth of the Burlington Reaper, started noticing discrepancies that others had missed. The forensic evidence began to unravel under her scrutiny. She found that the blood samples from the crime scenes showed signs of synthetic manipulation, and the fingerprints on the planted evidence were eerily generic, almost as if they had been deliberately sanitized. Rivera's instincts told her that something was amiss. Late one evening, in the quiet solitude of her cluttered office, she pored over the case files, connecting the dots in a pattern that defied conventional logic. The murders, she realized, had an uncanny consistency that seemed almost rehearsed. There were gaps in the timeline, moments where no crime had been reported despite expectations, and most curiously, there was a particular signature, a minute detail left at every scene that could have easily been dismissed as coincidence, but that now stood out like a red flag. It wasn't long before Rivera began to suspect that the real puppeteer was hidden in plain sight. Her investigations slowly circled back to the LCBO, where whispers of dissent and subtle acts of sabotage had always been attributed to stress or workplace rivalry. But as Rivera dug deeper, she discovered that one employee, in particular, seemed to have an uncanny knack for being present whenever chaos erupted. A woman whose unassuming demeanor masked a calculating mind. Her name was Veronica, and behind her seemingly trivial role as a stalker, Rivera began to uncover evidence of deliberate tampering. Yet the evidence was as slippery as the shadows in which Veronica operated. Every time Rivera thought she had uncovered a link, it dissolved into a labyrinth of red herrings. Veronica had been meticulous, planting false trails and even framing other employees to divert suspicion. She had turned the other women against Leonard and Michael, whispering lies and half-truths that painted the two Lurches as ruthless figures responsible for the horrors that plagued Hamilton and Burlington. In doing so, she had not only secured her twisted vendetta, but also ensured that the public, and even the police, would never see the truth. Via game of shadows and lies, within the LCBO, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent found themselves isolated, their reputations tarnished by an unrelenting tide of accusations. Poor Lurch Calloway, burdened with the heavy lifting and endless task of stocking bottles, endured not only the physical labor but also the constant stares of suspicion and disdain. Michael Trent, whose quiet intensity masked an inner turmoil, watched as the situation escalated, realizing that the very chaos that once cloaked him now threatened to consume everything he held dear. Outside, the staged murders continued to make headlines, but behind the sensational stories, a different narrative was unfolding. Veronica, in the privacy of her modest apartment, sat before a mirror, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and obsession. As she idly flipped through pages of a well-worn notebook, her mind raced with schemes, each one more devious than the last. In those moments she allowed herself a perverse pleasure, a secret satisfaction that came from knowing she had everyone fooled. She would often lean back in her chair, a sly smile curling her lips as she flicked her bean, imagining the torment that her carefully crafted lies had inflicted on her unsuspecting targets. The thrill of control was intoxicating. Each planted piece of evidence, each manipulated crime scene, was a step closer to her ultimate goal: to make Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent suffer for ignoring her silent advances. She had long harbored a secret crush on both men, a passion that was as twisted as it was unrequited. In her eyes, their brooding presence and stoic demeanor made them perfect objects of desire, figures of darkness worthy of her obsessive affection. And so she continued her campaign, confident that her brilliance would remain undetected. Yet, as the days turned to weeks, cracks began to appear in her meticulously constructed facade. A stray comment from a newly recruited employee hinted at witnessing Veronica sneaking into areas after hours, areas that were off-limits to regular staff. A security camera malfunction, conveniently timed with one of the murders, raised questions that even the local police could no longer ignore. Veronica, once a shadow slipping through the cracks of the LCBO, now found herself at a crossroads. The delicate balance between her fantasy and reality was beginning to tip, the unraveling of the grand illusion. Detective Rivera's investigation, growing ever more determined, finally began to close in on the true architect of the staged terror. Piecing together digital footprints, security camera glitches, and testimonies from reluctant witnesses, she started to form a picture of a woman who had been hiding behind the guise of incompetence. Rivera's breakthrough came late one rainy night when a confidential informant, a fellow stalker who feared Veronica's wrath, approached her with damning evidence. Surveillance footage that, though grainy, clearly showed Veronica entering restricted areas and tampering with evidence after hours. The revelation sent shockwaves through the department. Rivera, armed with the new evidence, orchestrated a covert operation to catch Veronica in the act. Meanwhile, at the LCBO, the atmosphere grew even more frayed. Rumors spread like wildfire. The female employees, now aware of Veronica's strange behavior, began to whisper amongst themselves, the seeds of betrayal already sown. Leonard and Michael, isolated and burdened by endless work and suspicion, found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. a nightmare that was not born of their actions, but of someone else's malicious design. On the day of the operation, the tension in the LCBO was palpable. Veronica, unaware that her every move was being watched, moved through the aisles with her usual quiet efficiency. But beneath that calm exterior, her mind raced with plans and dark fantasies. She had already turned the other ladies against the Lurches, ensuring that any minor misstep would be magnified and twisted into evidence of guilt. Now, as the clock ticked toward the moment of her exposure, she felt a flicker of panic, a crack in her perfect mask. In a dramatic confrontation that would forever alter the fates of those involved, Detective Rivera and her team intercepted Veronica in a secluded storage room. The evidence, irrefutable and damning, left no room for denial. As Veronica's carefully constructed world began to collapse, her eyes widened in disbelief. The truth was out. None of the gruesome murders, the staged crime scenes, or the trail of terror had been real. It was all a ruse, a product of one woman's twisted desire to see the two Lurches suffer. Sebond, the aftermath. When truth emerges, the revelation rocked Hamilton and Burlington alike. The media, once fueled by tales of a merciless killer, now found itself scrambling to reframe the story as a massive case of deception and psychological manipulation. Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent, once seen as monstrous figures, were now exonerated of crimes they had never committed. Their names, tarnished by the malicious lies of a jealous co-worker, were slowly being cleansed in the court of public opinion. For Leonard and Michael, the shock of the revelation was both a relief and a burden. They had spent months navigating the labyrinth of fear and suspicion, their lives reduced to endless labor at the LCBO and constant paranoia. Now, as the truth emerged, they were forced to confront the fact that they had been unwitting victims of a cruel scheme, a scheme masterminded by a woman who had used her unrequited love as a weapon. The betrayal cut deep, leaving them to grapple with not only the external injustice of false accusations, but also the internal scars of being manipulated by someone they had once trusted. Veronica, for her part, became a pariah. The evidence against her was overwhelming. In the glare of public scrutiny and a relentless legal investigation, her elaborate web of deceit unraveled. No longer the shadowy figure who had operated unseen, she was forced to face the consequences of her actions. In court, her explanations, fraught with delusions of grandeur and twisted affections, did little to mitigate the horror of her crimes. The judge, unmoved by her pleas and revelations of her personal obsessions, delivered a verdict that left little doubt. Her actions were premeditated, her motives fueled by jealousy and an insatiable need for control. What? Redemption, regret, and the echoes of a dark legacy. In the months that followed, Hamilton and Burlington began the slow, painful process of healing. The two Lurches, Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent, found themselves at a crossroads. With their names finally cleared, they had to decide how to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of a nightmare that had been orchestrated by someone they had never suspected. For Leonard, the challenge was not just reclaiming his reputation, but also overcoming the relentless burden of forced labor and isolation. For Michael, the struggle was equally profound, a quest for identity in a world that had once demonized him for crimes he had never committed. Both men turned to the only refuge they knew, the mundane rhythm of daily work at the LCBO, the familiar aisles and stacked bottles, serving as a reminder of a life that had been nearly destroyed by lies. Yet, even as they labored, the scars of the past remained. The memory of whispered accusations, the weight of unfair judgment, and the lingering knowledge that they had been set up by a twisted admirer haunted their every step. Detective Rivera, hailed as the relentless seeker of truth, continued her work with renewed vigor. The case had been a turning point in her career, a reminder that beneath the surface of every dark legend there might lie a far more intricate human drama. Rivera's dedication not only exonerated two innocent men, but also exposed a sinister subplot of manipulation and unbridled jealousy. For her, the case was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but the cost had been measured in the lives of those caught in the crossfire of one woman's deranged desires. Veronica's sentence served as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession. Locked away behind cold, impenetrable walls, she was left with nothing but the echoes of her own madness. In the silent hours of her confinement, she would recall the thrill of control, the twisted joy of watching her fantasies unfold in real time, and the bitter satisfaction of seeing the two Lurches suffer. But those moments, now confined to memory, offered little solace. The truth, as brutal as it was, had set in. Her crimes were not acts of passion, but deliberate, calculated attempts to destroy lives, a legacy of terror that she would carry with her, even in the darkness of her cell. The ninth chapter in the shadows. As Hamilton and Burlington began to rebuild, the stories of Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent took on a new, nuanced meaning. No longer were they the monstrous figures of a horror legend. Instead, they became symbols of resilience in the face of betrayal and injustice. Their journey from feared outcasts to victims of a cruel conspiracy resonated with a city that had once lived in terror of the unknown. In quiet moments, both men found solace in the mundane. Leonard returned to his solitary rounds at King's Forest Golf Course, finding a strange peace in the early morning fog and the soft rustle of dew on the greens. Michael, whose inner turmoil had once threatened to break him, discovered a renewed sense of purpose through community outreach, helping those who had also suffered under the weight of false accusations and societal prejudice. Together, they forged an unspoken bond, a shared understanding born of survival and the relentless pursuit of truth. The LCBO, once a battleground of whispered slander and covert vendettas, slowly returned to its routine. The female employees, who had once been pawns in Veronica's elaborate game, began to realize the depths of the deception that had plagued their workplace. In hushed conversations over shift changes, they lamented the loss of trust and the pain inflicted by the lies that had been spun around them. Yet even in regret, there was a glimmer of hope, a determination to rebuild, to learn from the past, and to forge a future defined by transparency and compassion. And so, as the sun set over Hamilton and Burlington, the dark legend of the Lurches evolved. No longer was it the story of bloodshed and terror. It had become a cautionary tale about the perils of envy, the destructive power of unchecked desire, and the enduring need for truth in a world that often hides behind a mask of routine. The memory of those dark days would never fully fade, but in their place grew a resolve to never allow such manipulation to take root again. Epilogue. Echoes in the night. In the end, the saga of Leonard Calloway, Michael Trent, and the twisted architect of their torment, Veronica, served as a stark reminder of the fragility of truth. The city learned that fear could be manufactured with careful precision, that even the most harrowing nightmares might be nothing more than a web of lies spun by a heart consumed by jealousy. Yet amid the ruins of deception, a quiet resilience emerged. The Lurches, once demonized by a world that had mistaken darkness for danger, became living symbols of redemption, a testament to the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. In the silent corridors of the LCBO, where bottles were now arranged with care and the ghosts of the past seemed to fade into memory, whispers of the true story occasionally surfaced. Long after the legal battles had ended and the headlines had faded, the tale of a jealous stalker who had once orchestrated a symphony of staged terror remained, a story shared in hushed tones among those who believed that even in the heart of darkness there was a lesson to be learned. For Detective Rivera, the case became a permanent part of her legacy, a reminder that even the most intricate deceptions could be unraveled by determination, intuition, and a refusal to accept easy answers. And for Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent, every day at the LCBO and every quiet moment on the golf course was a step toward reclaiming their lives, a defiant statement that even the cruelest lies could not forever shroud the truth. As the city settled into an uneasy peace, the legacy of those turbulent days continued to cast long shadows. But with each new dawn, Hamilton and Burlington moved forward, forever changed yet determined to rise above the darkness that had once nearly consumed them. In the end, the true horror had not been the staged crimes or the sensational headlines. It had been the human capacity for envy, deceit, and the desperate need for validation. And it was this truth, raw and unadorned, that would continue to echo in the quiet moments of every life touched by the legend of the Hamilton Lurch. In quiet moments, both men found solace in the mundane. Leonard returned to his solitary rounds at King's Forest Golf Course, finding a strange peace in the early morning fog and the soft rustle of dew on the greens. Michael, whose inner turmoil had once threatened to break him, discovered a renewed sense of purpose through community outreach, helping those who had also suffered under the weight of false accusations and societal prejudice. Together, they forged an unspoken bond, a shared understanding born of survival and the relentless pursuit of truth. The LCBO, once a battleground of whispered slander and covert vendettas, slowly returned to its routine. The female employees, who had once been pawns in Veronica's elaborate game, began to realize the depths of the deception that had plagued their workplace. In hushed conversations over shift changes, they lamented the loss of trust and the pain inflicted by the lies that had been spun around them. Yet even in regret, there was a glimmer of hope, a determination to rebuild, to learn from the past, and to forge a future defined by transparency and compassion. And so, as the sun set over Hamilton and Burlington, the dark legend of the Lurches evolved. No longer was it the story of bloodshed and terror. It had become a cautionary tale about the perils of envy, the destructive power of unchecked desire, and the enduring need for truth in a world that often hides behind a mask of routine. The memory of those dark days would never fully fade, but in their place grew a resolve to never allow such manipulation to take root again. Epilogue. Echoes in the night. In the end, the saga of Leonard Calloway, Michael Trent, and the twisted architect of their torment, Veronica, served as a stark reminder of the fragility of truth. The city learned that fear could be manufactured with careful precision, that even the most harrowing nightmares might be nothing more than a web of lies spun by a heart consumed by jealousy. Yet amid the ruins of deception, a quiet resilience emerged. The Lurches, once demonized by a world that had mistaken darkness for danger, became living symbols of redemption, a testament to the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. In the silent corridors of the LCBO, where bottles were now arranged with care and the ghosts of the past seemed to fade into memory, whispers of the true story occasionally surfaced. Long after the legal battles had ended and the headlines had faded, the tale of a jealous stalker who had once orchestrated a symphony of staged terror remained, a story shared in hushed tones among those who believed that even in the heart of darkness there was a lesson to be learned. For Detective Rivera, the case became a permanent part of her legacy, a reminder that even the most intricate deceptions could be unraveled by determination, intuition, and a refusal to accept easy answers. And for Leonard Calloway and Michael Trent, every day at the LCBO and every quiet moment on the golf course was a step toward reclaiming their lives, a defiant statement that even the cruelest lies could not forever shroud the truth. As the city settled into an uneasy peace, The legacy of those turbulent days continued to cast long shadows, but with each new dawn, Hamilton and Burlington moved forward, forever changed yet determined to rise above the darkness that had once nearly consumed them. In the end, the true horror had not been the staged crimes or the sensational headlines. It had been the human capacity for envy, deceit, and the desperate need for validation. And it was this truth, raw and unadorned, that would continue to echo in the quiet moments of every life touched by the legend of the Hamilton Lurch. Truth be told, I wish I didn't believe the further I dig into this, the more I realize that, or suspect, a cover-up. We will never know the truth, so if you're from Hamilton, Ontario, and you're listening, please be careful what you drink. Just remember there are monsters out there fed up with you. If you're not polite and careful, please be safe, everyone. Don't forget to share this video, like, and subscribe.